Hi everyone, I'm here today with another mini lecture to introduce you to the world of Puritan literature. I'm going to be drawing on some of the information in chapter 4 of our textbook today, providing a little bit of explanation and some outside context as well. So let's get started. Who were the Puritans anyways? I touch on this a little bit in the module, but it helps to have an understanding of what were these group of people. So the Puritans were part of a sect of Christianity back in England who broke away from what's known as the Church of England, or sometimes called the Anglican Church, mostly due to their objection about the influence of Catholicism. And so, owing to that and a number of reasons, the Puritans were at least part of the group of those who resettled in the American colonies throughout the 1600s and 1700s as well. They really did see themselves as religiously persecuted back in England. And that their religious views weren't tolerated in that society. So a lot of times I think it's helpful to picture a pilgrim, actually. A lot of times our mental image of that kind of hews pretty closely with the Puritans. One of the values that the Puritans are known for is austerity, or this sense of kind of self-discipline and self-denial. They also really valued humility and, as we're going to talk about a little more here, education. You might say that during the Puritan age, we really see the development of children's literature as its own specifically designated genre. I would argue that a children's book was a thing for the first time during the Puritan age. So we see the emergence of books that are specifically with an audience of children in mind. And we talked about didactic literature last week, the sense of books that are meant to teach. And the Puritans have not let go of that. This is didacticism with a vengeance. But now it's all mingled with the spiritual. The ultimate purpose is to provide and deliver a spiritual education to children alongside literacy and book learning and all the rest of that good stuff. Seth Lehrer talks about in the chapter what he refers to as moral literacy on page 83, and I'm quoting directly here, which is a sense that books could shape lives. And that's something that the Puritans believed in. They really wanted to use literature to contribute to the upbringing of children. When it comes to the life of the Puritan child, it helps for us to kind of step back and take a look at overall what was their view of childhood in society at this time. For the Puritans, child rearing was a grave and sacred responsibility. And while they by no means shared the same view on parenting that we have today in the modern age, there really was a marked investment in the development of Puritan children. Lehrer highlights a phrase from James Janeway, who is the author of A Token for Children, and he quotes from this on page 81 that the Puritans saw their children as precious jewels to cultivate. Later in the chapter, we get this great description of the nature of children that Lehrer quotes from. His soul is yet a white paper unscribbled with observations of the world. And this description, it might seem familiar, kind of harkens a little bit to the concept of tabula rasa, which we're going to talk about a lot next week in our unit on John Locke. But the idea of the child as kind of a blank page, children are very much valued, but they're also, in the view of the Puritans, not yet imbued with the necessary discipline and Christian values. So they weren't ready for heaven. And this, for the Puritans, was a problem to be remedied. It was a problem, particularly because of the pervasive presence of death and child mortality during this time period. So, parents really understood the reality that they may outlive their children. And so, literature was seen as part of this kind of urgent training in spirituality. And we see it filled all over with this lesson and the imagery of life being fleeting. If we worry that our children's lives are going to be short and we don't have much time to prepare them for heaven, then what kind of stories is it important to give them? This is where the importance of what are known as exemplars really came into play in Puritan literature for children. Exemplars are narrative accounts. They're stories, often in this time period, of the virtuous and moral lives of other children. A great example of this form of literature is James Janeway's Token for Children, which we'll be taking a look at least an excerpt of that this week. This book was first published in the year 1700, although we're looking at the 1781 New England edition. And it featured stories of the young and virtuous departed. So essentially, young Puritans who led exemplary lives and then died. Pretty grim, right? Oftentimes, these accounts really held up obedience and piety as admirable virtues for all children to emulate. In particular, we're going to be looking at this week the story of the prodigious John Harvey, who lived from 1654 to 1665, and the account of his life. But this was a really popular form of didactic literature at the time. And you can especially see in the story of John Harvey what's kind of being held up as sort of a prototype of the ideal Puritan child. Alongside Janeway's Token for Children, we're also going to be looking at some selected pages from the New England Primer, which was probably the most popular and widely disseminated children's text of the Puritan age. The New England Primer was essentially an alphabet book with an educational focus. It featured pictures and rhymes, but also accompanied by scripture with hymns and prayers. There was a real sense of literacy kind of mingled with spirituality here. The original of the New England Primer was likely published circa 1680 or 90. We're going to be looking here specifically at the 1727 edition, which is, I think, one of the later surviving editions of the book. You'll notice when you're reading the excerpt that death really stalks its every page. You'll find in the alphabet section of the primer that we're confronted with these statements such as runs the glass, man's life doth pass, which was a sentiment the Puritans wanted to impress upon their children. Or, as it's put even more bluntly in the last page of the excerpt, from the poem titled Uncertainty of Life, it says, I in the burying place may see graves shorter there than I. From death's arrest no age is free, young children too may die. So it's not exactly cheery, but this is really characteristic of children's literature at the time. Not exactly Shel Silverstein, huh? All right, that just about wraps it up from me. There's lots more great information and contextualizing in the chapter, but I look forward to hearing your thoughts.